What if I told you that over 200 Americans are dying every single day in what looks like a coordinated foreign-backed operation, yet Congress is still debating how to even define the conflict? Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Today, we're digging into a really crucial stack of sources. We've got these explosive findings from a select committee investigation, military policy reports too, all trying to shed light on this deadly link between a foreign superpower, transnational cartels, and, well, the fentanyl crisis devastating America. The sources we have suggest this whole thing has moved way past traditional drug trafficking. It's looking more like state-sponsored asymmetric warfare.
Yeah, that shift in terminology is really key, and it's why these sources are so important. And the scale of the problem, I mean, it certainly warrants the alarm. If you just look at the raw statistics, it's staggering. On average, like you said, more than 200 Americans die from fentanyl every single day. You annualize that. That death toll, it actually eclipses the total U.S. casualties from the entire Vietnam War. That gives you a sense of the sheer scale of the threat we're facing right here at home. Okay, so the Select Committee investigation claims they traced this threat right back to the root. What did they actually identify as the ultimate source of this poison flooding in?
They pointed directly to the People's Republic of China, the PRC. Bipartisan reports are confirming the PRC produces something like over 97% of the fentanyl precursors that are flooding the global market. But the most alarming thing they found, what the sources are really framing as the smoking gun, is that the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, isn't just, passively letting this happen. They seem to be actively promoting it through direct financial mechanisms.
How could the CCP actively promote exporting lethal narcotics that are, technically illegal even inside China?
Well, through economic incentives, specifically value-added tax rebates, VAT rebates. The CCP provides these government subsidies to Chinese chemical companies. Companies that manufacture and export illegal synthetic narcotics, including really deadly fentanyl analogs. But here's the kicker. The subsidy only applies if they sell the drugs outside China. Analysis found that companies selling these subsidized narcotics, they increase their exports at a rate up to 10 times greater than non-subsidized sales. So the sources conclude this basically amounts to a state-sponsored drug transfer operation.
Wow, okay. And what's been the U.S. government's reaction to what sounds like deliberate financial warfare?
The reaction has been pretty decisive and very military-focused. The U.S. president formally determined that the nation is now engaged in what's called a non-international armed conflict, or NIAC. That's NIAC, with designated cartel terrorist organizations. This is a really profound legal step. It asserts constitutional authority to use lethal force in self-defense, and it classifies alleged traffickers as unlawful combatants. And it's not just talk, it's already resulted in U.S. military strikes.
Right. So our mission today is really to unpack the hard evidence connecting CCP policy to this lethal cartel network, and also to explore the military and legislative actions these reports argue are needed to, well, restore security and protect American lives. Let's start maybe at the operational ground zero, the southern border. The sources seem to clearly link the breakdown of border control directly to how fentanyl gets distributed, stating that these transnational cartels have basically established operational control.
That's right. And look, these cartels, they aren't small-time smugglers anymore. These are organizations operating with the resources of, like, a major corporation. The Mexican cartels generate an estimated $30 billion in illicit revenue every single year. To put that in perspective, the sources note they're now the fifth largest employer in Mexico. That's huge. They boast somewhere between 160,000 and 185,000 members, and they use military-level weapons, armored vehicles, even advanced drones.
And what do the national security metrics tell us about the cost of this breakdown in control, both in, human lives and our vulnerability?
Oh, the cost is extreme. Between just 2021 and 2023, we recorded 326,126 overdose deaths. That's almost a third of a million people. But beyond the drug crisis itself, the lack of border security has created this unprecedented vulnerability. Under recent administrations, Border Patrol saw a 2,600% increase in encounters with individuals on the terrorist watch list compared to previous years. We're talking 286 hits versus just 11 previously. That's a massive jump.
And perhaps the most concerning vulnerability, as these sources suggest, involves the people we don't catch, the unknown population.
Absolutely. We have nearly 2 million known gotaways. These are individuals who successfully evaded Border Patrol entirely. And these sources point out these individuals come from over 180 countries, including some state sponsors of terrorism. These are people who likely paid extra specifically to avoid being identified or vetted. It suggests they really don't want to be tracked by U.S. authorities.
It sounds like the cartels are really leveraging sophisticated tools to maintain this control and evade detection.
Oh, they are. They're exploiting a major technology gap using unmanned aircraft systems, drones. They use them for reconnaissance, for guiding smuggling runs. NORAD estimates these drone incursions exceed 1,000 incidents per month. Think about that. It's a constant violation of U.S. airspace by hostile criminal groups. And the reports highlight that Border Patrol is often prevented from engaging these hostile cartel drones. That gives the cartels a distinct advantage in surveillance and operational security.
Let's circle back to the CCP's role. You mentioned the financial incentives, the VAT rebates. Did the Select Committee find anything more specific about just how lethal these subsidized chemicals are?
Yeah, the lag is pretty chilling. The VAT scheme subsidizes the export of at least 17 illegal synthetic narcotics. That includes 14 deadly fentanyl analogs. And these aren't just, generic components. The sources note some are virtually chemical weapons-grade substances, extremely potent.
Can you give us a specific example? Just how potent are we talking about?
Sure. One of the subsidized narcotics is called 3-methylfentanyl. It's estimated to be up to 6,000 times stronger than morphine, and it's reportedly been used as a chemical weapon in the past. Now, what's arguably even more audacious, according to these reports, is that the CCP reportedly increased these subsidies in 2019 and 2020, right when they were supposedly negotiating with U.S. officials about controlling the opioid crisis.
Wow, that sounds less like negligence and more like,
Right.
well, a direct declaration of economic warfare, as you said. But if these drugs are illegal in China, too, how do the sources explain the CCP making sure the chemicals don't flood their own market?
That really gets to the core of the state sponsorship claim in these reports. First, the sources note that CCP censorship rules make it hard to advertise or ship these drugs easily within China. But the VAT rebate specifically incentivizes export only. Second, the committee apparently found explicit evidence of active state protection for the traffickers. Get this. When U.S. law enforcement provided evidence of specific trafficking operations to their Chinese counterparts, the sources indicate that Chinese officials actually warned the drug traffickers about the U.S. investigation, and then subsequently took no action against them.
So the state isn't just turning a blind eye, it's actively shielding the criminals carrying this out.
Correct. And the involvement, according to the evidence cited, runs even deeper than just protection. There's evidence of state ownership. Some Chinese chemical companies selling these lethal drugs are actually owned by PRC government entities. One example cited is a company tied to a prison known for human rights abuses. Another trafficking company apparently even boasted internally that it was state-owned and tax-exempt. It really underscores this deep integration between the illicit trade and the state apparatus, according to these findings.
So the sources then are clearly suggesting this isn't accidental, it's a strategic choice for Beijing.
Yeah.
What's the ultimate strategic benefit the sources claim the CCP is aiming for?
Well, the reports argue this coordinated strategy fits right into the CCP's long-term goal of undermining the liberal democratic system, specifically targeting the U.S. One leading strategist they mentioned discussed drug warfare that causes disasters in other countries while making huge profits as a really effective asymmetric tactic. So it seems to provide dual benefits for Beijing: massive illicit profits that boost their economy, and at the same time, political destabilization of a major rival.
And these profits, they're not just staying with the cartels, they're flowing back into the hands of the Chinese elite through money laundering operations.
Precisely. The sheer volume of money from the fentanyl trade has, according to these sources, transformed Chinese organized crime into the world's premier money launderers. And U.S. law enforcement apparently found evidence that these massive laundering schemes involve Chinese government officials and the Communist Party elite. So essentially, the drug trade is fueling the very foreign adversaries who are actively working to destabilize our society while enriching the CCP at the highest levels.
Okay, this brings us right to the present moment and the shift in military posture. Declaring a non-international armed conflict, or NIAC, against these cartels. That's a huge shift. We need to unpack the significance of that legal step.
It really is critical. Declaring an NIAC shifts the entire threat assessment away from being purely a law enforcement problem and puts it squarely on a war footing. It asserts the president's constitutional authority as commander-in-chief to use lethal force in self-defense. And the administration specifically designated major groups: like the Sinaloa Cartel, MS-13, even the Venezuelan origin Tren de Aragua as terrorist organizations.
And what does it mean practically for alleged traffickers to be classified as unlawful combatants? How did that change things?
That classification is really important because it shifts the authority. It moves from standard police work and the criminal justice system over to the military and the law of armed conflict. It effectively places alleged cartel members into the same legal category that was previously reserved for designated terrorist networks like al-Qaeda. It's a clear signal that the U.S. is prepared to meet this threat with military force. And like I mentioned, we've already seen direct strikes based on this, attacks in September that killed several identified unlawful combatants.
The rationale presented in these sources for such, well, aggressive action seems to be primarily about national survival, right? What are the conservative national security arguments justifying military intervention, especially if, say, the Mexican government is resistant to cooperating?
The core rationale is that the threat has become existential, demanding military options that go beyond traditional diplomacy or law enforcement. The sources argue that unilateral action might even be necessary to prompt cooperation from a resistant Mexican government, whose own security policies, they claim, have granted cartels significantly expanded operating freedom. The recommended strategy isn't just military force, though. It involves leveraging massive economic pressure, things like tariffs, which have proven effective before, and exploiting the reliance of Chinese companies and banks on legitimate global commerce, essentially forcing them to choose access to the global economic system or continuing the illicit drug trade.
Okay, so to actually win this conflict, these sources argue Congress needs to step up with specific financial and legal actions. What are the key legislative mandates being called for?
Funding is number one. Congress absolutely must appropriate the resources needed for an enhanced, scalable military role at the border. This includes emergency supplemental appropriations. The reports really highlight this as an issue of priorities, noting that current defense budget requests often funnel billions, like $2.91 billion for the European Deterrence Initiative, towards more traditional Cold War-era theaters, rather than prioritizing the direct protection of the American homeland from this immediate lethal threat.
Right. And beyond just funding the military presence, what specific legal tools do these sources say are needed to actually shut down the supply chain?
Congress needs to eliminate customs loopholes. A big one mentioned is the de minimis exception. This allows small, low-value packages to enter the country basically unchecked. And the sources argue this is being expertly exploited by traffickers to ship highly potent fentanyl, often right through the mail system. Crucially, Congress also needs to explicitly authorize the Department of Defense to deploy military assets. We're talking active duty and National Guard for migration enforcement, for alien detention, and for direct counter-cartel actions, like empowering them to shoot down those hostile cartel drones operating over our border. That's a key capability gap right now.
So we've basically mapped this direct line the sources lay out, starting with CCP financial subsidies, flowing through sophisticated Mexican cartel networks, and tragically resulting in the deaths of hundreds of Americans every single day. This is how the sources frame the reality: a coordinated, foreign-backed assault on American citizens and, frankly, on our sovereignty.
Yeah, the realization here is pretty profound when you lay it out like that. The declaration of an NIAC, it signals the U.S. is treating this threat as war, not just crime anymore. The military strategy isn't just about border enforcement in a vacuum. It's about actively fighting back against a hostile foreign adversary and their criminal proxies who are causing mass American casualties on our own soil. We really have to adopt that level of gravity, that perspective, if we're going to succeed here.
It really is a critical line in the sand being drawn. And consider this final thought, something highlighted in these sources. If the threat posed by members of just one group, the Tren de Aragua cartel, is seen as so profound that the administration felt compelled to dust off and invoke the 1798 Wartime Alien Enemies Act, that's a 227-year-old law, just to rapidly deport them, then what political or constitutional limitation should we really accept that prevents us from fully funding and securing our border immediately against this kind of ongoing assault? Something to think about.